CSG is committed to solving your toughest business problems. A trusted partner to companies in more than 120 countries, we deliver flexible revenue management, innovative customer engagement, and award-winning digital monetization solutions. We know that digital transformation isn't just about technology. It's about crafting agile business models that will serve you today and allow you to thrive tomorrow. It's about turning challenges into opportunities. Find out more at csgi.com.
My daughter finished her education and started to look for a job. I was quite surprised to understand that she's challenged to find a job, not because she was not qualified, just because she was biased. She was discriminated in a way because of her hearing disability. She's deaf and very talented, and couldn't find a job at the beginning. The fact that it was so challenging caught me by a surprise, and I understood that people with disabilities are suffering from discrimination, and we need to do something about it. I don't see enough people with disabilities around us, you know, and I do think that it's not fair. We have so many talented people that can bring a lot of value to us and we to them. And this is such a shame. When we only open the door, it can make such a difference. So as soon as we just gave them a chance, it made such a huge difference for us as people, for them, and for the whole organization. This is really what made me move. You know, mentoring is like matching. It's finding the right combination between the mentor and the mentee. And that's really tough sometimes, because you have these two people with very good intentions, but to find the right match, to find the right people that can really communicate well together without pity, with only good intention on both sides, but they really need to suit each other.
Hello and welcome to the Digital Transformation World Series. It is lovely to have your company for this, our live session, and we have got so much to get through. You are joining us for AI, Data and Analytics Episode 3, and as always we have an expert commentator with us to guide us through, to give us his valued opinion, his thoughts, his opinions, his considered judgments. Jay Shah, welcome. Hello.
Thank you, Sasha. That's quite an introduction. Thank you, and welcome everybody. I'm looking forward to a great event.
Well, you have to live up to it now. We're very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. First of all, where are you joining us from? Where are you today?
I'm joining you from Singapore, and yeah, it's just hit 8 o'clock here.
In the evening, right? Okay, so a nice evening's entertainment for you then. Tell me, what are you looking forward to? What sort of, you know, the things that you want to hear now?
Well, we've all heard for a long time, right? When they hear artificial intelligence, they think it's going to be part of some boring PowerPoint presentation. And if it was written in Python, it's probably machine learning or something or the other. But this is the one time that we're going to see AI being put into action. And we're going to hear from some great speakers talking about their own experiences of using artificial intelligence and using data in the right ways to actually optimize a lot of functions in the business and come up with new products.
What are some of the big challenges that you think the industry has to grapple with, has to sort of, you know, come to terms with, that you want to hear talked about today?
Well, this is an industry where we don't have to worry about the amount of data. You know, telecommunications industry, you've got incredible amounts of data coming from all over the place. But some of the biggest challenges that exist is all the silos. There are way too many silos, department and silos within all these organizations, and also getting the right visionary leadership sort of in place in order to move things along faster than what they are right now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, we've got a lot of content, Jay. Really looking forward to hearing your views and your opinions on this, and looking forward to hearing your views and opinions as well, because please do post your thoughts and your questions in the chat box and the question and answer box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also run some polls throughout this session as well, which Jay will have a look at. So very much looking forward to your answers on those ones. So yes, get in touch, get involved. And what we also find as well is that it's a great networking place as well, the chat window. Where we're going to start though, we're going to look at a faster way to crunch really large amounts of data. Jay was saying there's not exactly a lack of data that we can talk about. This is particularly using a GPU accelerated analytics. So let's hear now from Gerard at Charter Communications and Herfini at Omnisci.
Hello everyone, my name is Herfini Haryono. I am VP of Industry Verticals in Omnisci. Omnisci is an accelerated analytics company based in San Francisco. Together with me is Jared Ritter, Senior Director, Analytics and Automation in Charter Communication, the second largest cable company in the USA. Our presentation today is about how Charter Communication uses GPU accelerated analytics to give them a competitive speed and scale advantage. So the next slide is about who are some of our key customers. There are real impacts provided by our platform for our customers. Whether it's Charter Communication in the telco communication industry, who has been our customer for some years. As a CSP, they are dealing with data at scale. New data keeps coming so fast and in a big volume, containing usage data, network quality, financial or social media, and so on. Omnisci is providing the speed that is required to process all those data. We are also supporting some works in the federal government in the US, which face challenges to process real-time and interactive insight into their reporting. And we also have Skyhook, a location technology company providing geospatial insight to help their customers to make better business decisions. Similarly, they deal with huge amounts of data, which not only need fast processing, but also geospatially mapped accurately. We list down 5 challenges here that become critical now and need to be addressed quickly across the CSP, right? So first of all is about multiple sources of data at scale. Multiple data sources producing various data of transaction, network performance, customer complaint, or sales information, as we discussed earlier. They are produced in a huge amounts in every single second from multiple sources every day, right? And next, there is the challenge of the data processing. Mediation, ETL, and data cleansing remain challenging. In many cases, due to the lengthy process, the reporting is delayed for some days where decisions need to be made almost instantly. Not to mention that the competitors are also not waiting. And the next point, while there are more data scientists available compared to 3-5 years ago, right? The need for new set of reporting and analysis could be tripled compared to the year before, for example. Various business units require different type of data perspective to analyze. So we do need smarter analytics platform to take over or simplify some parts of the data scientist workload. And as next two are related to the new technology. As the new technology evolves together with the 5th point, the data is getting more complex while there are more service types to be offered. We deal, for example, what is new is the network slicing in 5G. Each slice owns different set of counters and produce multiple data source from what only one single channel data source before. And multiple type of services offered in 5G are adding complexity to ensure individual SLA is maintained and also to offer the best suitable product or service. So just for these 2 last challenges, we could imagine how the data analytics require type of power and capability as compared to what mostly available in the market. So before I ask Jared to present, I would like to illustrate the power of Omnisci through some simpler site. So the next page showing various use cases in telco, which you all are already familiar with, I believe. So most of this is backed by one single source of data or 2, either CDR data, like the usage and top up information here, or the network data for the optimization or this fraud report. So what we can do with OmniSci is, this is the next slide that we can quickly share with you, that we can bring OmniSci over the top of those native tools that are available in your environment, which normally provided by each system that are purchased. This slide is giving clear illustration about how OmniSci could join various native tools outcomes, produce new set of analysis out of multiple sources of data coming from different tools, and eliminate silo among them. So if we go back to the next slide that we presented before, first example that I would like to share with you. Actually, we can join 3 different types of analysis, for example, combining the usage information, right? And then the usage information with social media and the optimization analytics. This joining could happen easily. With this new analysis, we can start to put priority on who from our customers' usage profile require network improvement, and verify their influence in social media so that customer handling can be planned accordingly, for example. And the second example, so this is the new site showing is actually the capability to join the credit rating, up cross-selling data, and the campaign tracking. With this, you can select those customers with better credit rating profile to be targeted for cross-upselling with more suitable product, and tracking any event in real-time manner during the campaign period. And all these are done over one single platform, which is OmniSci. So new, almost impossible or time-consuming analysis that are require earlier can be much more simpler being handled by our platform. I think that's it. That's all what I want to share with you. Please feel free to contact us for further inquiries, and I hope you find my presentation useful. Let me now hand over to Jared and to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Herfini. Like Herfini said, my name is Jared Ritter. I am Senior Director of Analytics and Automation for Charter Communications in our Data Analytics Operations Group. Let me see. Okay. All right. So a little background about Charter is we're a multi-service operator. Like Catherine mentioned in the beginning, we are a multi-service operator of we're essentially the second biggest in North America. And what you probably know about carriers and MSOs is the network is our product. That includes our hybrid fiber coax network, which is essentially the cable service you get at your house. Wi-Fi, which is public Wi-Fi, venue Wi-Fi, the venue Wi-Fi that might be in your coffee shop or in the stadium that you go to. 5G networks, IoT networks, etc. So this is really our core offering to our customers is the connectivity we provide, especially these days when more people are working from home, going to school from home. So this is obviously our focus being in the network operations group. Operation of the network has to be your core competency if you are selling connectivity to people. And particularly these days, most devices are wireless, right? The device I'm using now is wireless. You're probably using a wireless device. So this is a critical focus for Charter, and we view wireless connectivity as being just as important as our traditional wireline products. So network and systems operations groups like the one I am in are really where the rubber meets the road in a company like this. And this holds true for cellular carriers that I've worked for, as well as cable providers. But a high operations tempo means that we have some unique requirements. And so that sort of begs the question, why are we here? Why is there a network operations group talking to you and not a business intelligence group, right? Well, for us, there's a problem. So business intelligence and big data, traditionally in companies like ours, they have they have a lot of our data, and there's information locked in that data that we need. But we need it in a way that's different from your traditional BI posture, right? BI is very, I don't want to say they're slow, but they iterate on longer cycles than what we need. Operations, lives and dies by real-time information. So, in order to not make bad business decisions based on data, operations needs a different, essentially tool suite and maybe some additional best practices for dealing with data and data governance. So we need access to pretty much everything your business intelligence people do, plus a little more, right? We need telemetry from our network elements. We need to understand impacts at the accounting layer, authorization, success and failure, authentication, success and failure, control and user plane data. So we need to understand our customers' experience, beyond just waiting for alerts in a network control center, right? We want to be on top of our network from every angle possible. So a solution to that is to implement a workflow that applies data operations techniques, applies data science techniques in sort of a DevOps, data ops, model ops structure within network operations, where it's really never lived before in a multi-service operator or a traditional telephony company. So our solution is we've instrumented our network management infrastructure, which most carriers, will have element managers, they'll have deep packet inspection systems, fault management systems, diagnostic systems. Well, we have all of that, but in addition to that, we have a principled approach to extracting and synchronizing, normalizing, analyzing, and automating off of data from those environments, utilizing real-time ETL, really fast databases, really fast visualizers like OmniSci, and machine learning and deep learning resources. And like anything a multi-service operator does, there has to be a return on investment for you to get investment from, in CapEx from executive management. So we really had to prove that out. We had to, we basically had to log some successes to make all this happen. So what does that look like in a graphical format? Well, our network systems operations group works a lot like a traditional CI/CD type DevOps environment, where you have your, data operations functions, which are like construction of data pipelines, management of configuration and integrity of data sources, unification of data sources, right? Orchestrating in pipeline joins and applying inference models in pipelines, and doing quality monitoring of that data, because it's always been the case that we've had plenty of data. We've just had a dearth of good data, right? Good actionable data is very important, and data science principles are key to getting there. Then there's logical models, what you might call model ops these days. So this is where anywhere that you're using AI models, in order to maintain trust in a telecom environment, you have to have auditability. That's not something that has usually been present in AI models. Many times they're black boxes, and you don't have the same control, like revision control and breakpoint monitoring that you have in your regular code. That doesn't fly in operations, especially if you're using AI in line with an automation. So you have to be very disciplined about version control of your AI model and auditability of it. And that's what we've implemented here at Charter in network operations. And then of course your traditional DevOps stuff, which is where you actually leverage the data from the first two steps in actual, queries, visualizations, automations, and functional analysis. So if you're wondering, this is what our environment looks like. So just no need to really focus in on all of the little pieces of information here, but I like this slide because it shows, it shows the systems sort of producing the data that we ingest, the way we ingest it, the fact that we use a pretty large time series database to archive it all, and then we use tools like OmniSci, Rapids, and scikit-learn, and all your traditional data science tools once we have that good, clean data at our disposal. So OmniSci would be one of our, premier visualizers for doing data exploration and deep analysis, especially nowadays, because OmniSci, you've seen the integration of a lot of data science tools, right? A lot of integration at the data frame layer with Jupyter notebooks. And the more integration at this right-hand layer, the better, right? Because moving data in between these environments could potentially be a hassle if you didn't have that integration. So here you can see where we have accounting, authentication data, telemetry from our wireless network, inventory and workflow updates. You have client metrics from actual, handset diagnostics. You have deep packet inspection data, so actual packet captures off of the wire of your network, all integrated into a laminar data flow that's synchronized in time series, spatially, and several other ways to make it meaningful at these right-hand layers of visualization and automation. Normally we do sort of a live demo of creating a dashboard and going through it, but I thought we'd probably, in the interest of brevity, just like show you a recent one that we did to find a very specific problem. So I mentioned deep packet inspection data. So that's data that's essentially packet capture information. That's an infrastructure that a lot of carriers have, right? Almost every large carrier has a NetScout or Sandvine deep packet inspection architecture. And that's useful for about 4 people in your company who are your highest level engineers who need that level of interrogation to your network. And what it does is it saves in a rotary storage for a few days or a few weeks every packet that your clients transmit on your network. And if you're looking for something specific, it's great. If you are debugging at the protocol level, it's great. And these companies, they try and give you some insights based on the data that's contained in those packets. But we found you can really elevate the ROI of those platforms by pulling summary data out of them and integrating them with your other data sets. And so that's what you see here. This is a visualization of NetScout deep packet inspection data. And so the question we're trying to answer here is, somewhere in our network, is there correlation between retransmissions and backhaul bandwidth saturation? So since this packet data is massive in scale, the deep packet inspection platform is really narrow in what you can do across the data. But what you can see here is we use OmniSci to visualize that data. This is actual data. And so this contains an amalgam of packet data from the lowest level of our network, summarized packet data that allows us to identify areas where there is a correlation between retransmit impact and throughput. So you'll see here on the right of this graph, there's one or two antennas that are identified as having that correlation. Well, this is information we never could have gotten to just by using the tool as it exists, right? Because in this model, we've enriched what's coming off the wire with actual network inventory information and client usage information. We've gone, from a telescopic view of this is the whole United States, right, down to 2 access points in Florida that are really having issues, right? And so when we have that kind of power at our fingertips, the questions just start coming in, and you can only really answer them if you can explore your data and interact with your data rapidly. And you can only really do that if you're leveraging GPUs, GPU memory, and tools like OmniSci that take advantage of that. And so in the interest of keeping this brief, that is all I've got. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Herfini.
Gerard, thank you very much. Jay, let's get your thoughts on this one. There was a lot of information there. We went through an awful lot. So, tell me what you took out of it.
Data visualization is very important, especially when it's very critical, especially when you're trying to draw actionable insights. And that's the key area here. I got a short story, actually, remember, from personal experience. We had these amazing data visualization done. We had some charts, graphs, all sorts of different things. We called a C-level meeting, and they all sat down and looked at these screens, and they all went boggle-eyed. They didn't know what to actually think and what to make out of this thing. So one of the ways that I actually addressed this situation was hiring a junior business analyst to read through all of these charts and graphs and everything else and put it into simple layman English that they could actually read and draw some actionable insights. And there was some great adoption taken from there. But you do need to have some great data visualization tools in place if you're trying to go down this journey.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
very important.
Yeah, you need to, everybody on the same level needs to be able to understand and sort of get the same value from the data, the same idea. Jay,
Absolutely.
we were running a poll during that, and thank you so much if you've been getting involved and voting in the polls. Thank you, and also for all the questions and the comments as well. Very, very sort of open, general one, this one, but we were asking for the business benefits of AI to your organisation. I won't run through all the results. You can see them online. Interestingly, at the bottom was reduce headcount through automation. That was the lowest, which I'm probably guessing you're pleased to say, to see rather.
Yes.
But at the top, the idea that the business benefit, the number one, was it will make better decisions.
Absolutely. Businesses need to start moving towards more data-driven decision as opposed to I've got a crystal ball and I've been in the industry for 20, 30 years as a C-level or whatever, and I know exactly what the industry wants, because that's no longer the truth anymore. So we've got to actually use the data that we have access to and draw the right insights and then make better data-driven decisions in the organization.
We're going to concentrate on this a lot more as we go through this particular session, but for now, you're watching the Digital Transformation World Series.
Millions of users and billions of real-time transactions form the rhythm of modern telecom networks. From personalized product offerings to transformation of operators' systems, we keep the balance between adoption of new technologies and the importance of human connections.
Now, how do you ensure that the data you are looking at is the right data? We've got a really interesting case study now from Vodafone, and incidentally, the speaker is online at the moment to answer any of your questions. But let's take a listen to what he has to say. Here's Zahid Razak.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the time zone you're dialing in from. For the last couple of years, I've been leading a data transformation initiative within Vodafone Business, which is really aimed at identifying the data challenges and then addressing them as well across the organization. Once we've done that, improve the overall data maturity across Vodafone Business. The way I've structured my session today is I'll start off by talking about some of those key data challenges that we've had across the company. I'll also talk about the impact those challenges have had. I'll then move into the approach we've adopted so far on how we've tackled those challenges. And at the end, I'll talk about some of the lessons learned. Because if you're about to embark on a similar journey, at least you can benefit from the lessons we've learned so far. But before I go any further, I'll introduce Vodafone Business, because that's the part of the company that this is really aimed at addressing. So most of you would probably be aware of Vodafone, or you might be customers of Vodafone, but this particular initiative deals with the enterprise part of the business, which is about 10 billion in terms of business revenue, and it's about 30% when it comes to Vodafone Group revenue in total. Vodafone Business has about 23 wholly owned networks, and when you extend that, including partner networks, it extends to about 80 different countries. And we also have fixed infrastructure, which is connecting 182 countries across the globe. If I look at our customer base is quite spread. We have about 2.5 million small office, home office customers, 500,000 small, medium enterprise customers, 65,000 large enterprise customers, and about 1,400 large multinational companies. If you look at the portfolio and services that Vodafone Business provides, it's again in a number of areas, with the biggest one being mobility, which covers for about more than half, followed by fixed connectivity. And then you have things like unified communications, you have cloud connectivity or cloud and security, Internet of Things, and lastly, carrier services. So it gives you a picture of how broad, spread globally, with different type of customer segments and different products and portfolios that we're really offering to our customer base, which kind of gives you an idea of the type of data challenges one can expect. And that's the section I'm going to go into now. So when we started this a couple of years back and we started looking at the challenges that were there across the board, the first thing that really came out was around the fact that our data was inconsistent. And what I mean by inconsistent data is the fact that data is structured differently depending on where you're getting the information from. Now, Vodafone's a company that's grown through acquisition. And often when you acquire a company, you acquire the platforms and the data assets as well. And because this was part of different companies before the acquisition, you can imagine it would be structured differently. So when we were trying to bring the information together to make use of the end-to-end customer information, it wasn't a case of out of the box, things just gel together. We really had to think how we were going to solve it and really make sense of this differently structured data to get the most of it. So that was really the first problem we were up against. The second challenge we had was around the fact that our data was imperfect. Our quality wasn't up to the mark. And often when we were able to process data and come up with an insight, people still had doubts whether the insight was actually worth it or not. Because as the topic of the whole session is garbage in, garbage out, if you have wrong information coming in, any prediction or analysis you're going to make based on that data is going to be wrong as well. So it was really about how do we start addressing our data quality and get an idea of how bad we really are when it comes to the quality of the information we hold. The third challenge we had was around the lack of a single source of data, because people still needed to make decisions, the business still had to run, and in the absence of a single source of truth, you had different parts of the organization that had come up with their own data warehouse implementations or their own ability to answer questions. But because we had data misalignment, which I talked about earlier, it was really a case of if you asked the same question from different parts of the organization, you often got different answers. So it was really about how do we get to having a single source of truth across the company. The fourth challenge we had was around the lack of data standard definitions. A lot of it was things like product definitions. While we had product information agreed and structured at a high level, it was more at the granular level where we didn't really have the information that we needed to run things effectively from a data point of view. The fifth challenge we had was around the lack of a centralized data asset that could be used for analytics. Now imagine if your data scientists are trying to make use of this information where data is low quality and it's misaligned, it's going to be a tough ask. So our data scientists were spending most of their time having to work on data to get it to a structure where it actually made sense for them. And even then, they weren't sure whether it was the same information that others in the organization were working with. So it was really having that centralized data asset was a key gap when we kicked things off. And the last data challenge that we came across was the fact that our data volume was growing, like a lot of other companies in this digital age. So data volumes were growing, and our on-premises data warehouse solutions that we had in place at the time weren't fit for purpose. They weren't just going to make the cut. So with these 6 broad challenges, we went in and we tried getting a better understanding for how this was impacting different personas, different user bases across the company. And when we looked around, we immediately saw, because of the move to digital, there was heavy reliance on data. So for example, our marketing teams, they wanted the ability to understand for every pound worth of marketing spend, what was the actual revenue they were getting at the end of the day. And that all, again, relied on data. And in the absence of a centralized data capability, they weren't able to answer these type of questions. Our sales team, similarly, if they were going in for, let's say, a contract renewal, wanted to understand the last time the customer was with us, how well did we perform, where was the actual spend, so they could look at that data and be able to come up with, let's say, smart pricing and intelligent quoting solutions, so they knew they were going to address the customer's requirements based on the changes and trends they would have had over the last few months or years. Our IT teams at the same time wanted better customer and product data, because IT teams were working on automation initiatives, and the last thing they wanted to do was automate things only to find out later on that the product solutions that you have weren't defined based on the correct structure, which meant they had to go back and do things later on. So for us, the challenge was, how do we bring in those master data sources in place such that any work we do around our solutions are going to be there for the long term. Our customer experience teams similarly had a challenge, because while they were able to understand how they were performing with regards to, let's say, a trouble ticket resolution or a particular interaction with the customer, they lacked the ability to get a holistic view of the customer's experience right from the start, from the selling phase, onto the building phase, and eventually into the run or operations phase, as we call it. So it was really about getting that end-to-end view about the customer. Our operations team similarly wanted that holistic view, so they understood what was there in the pipeline in terms of new services that were about to be delivered, so they could be better prepared for supporting it. Our strategy teams at the same time wanted to have that end-to-end understanding and the ability to quickly get back data. So if they were experimenting or if they were trying something new from a strategy point of view, they had the data to be able to see whether it was actually making a difference or whether they had to go back to the drawing board. And lastly, it was our product teams that wanted granular data to understand which products were really making the mark, which ones were bringing the revenue that was expected, and which ones were really missing the marks, which meant maybe it was time for decommissioning or rethinking about our product strategy. Now, the approach we adopted to addressing these challenges, I'll start with the first one, which was inconsistent data and the imperfect data quality. And it was really about coming up with a structure based on which we could measure the amount of misalignment and how bad our data quality really was. And the way we did that was by getting data from key systems that were capturing some of the customer's journey. And when we brought that into our data lake, we then started measuring that against some of known masters, data masters across the industry. So for example, for address, it was about going to the postal service or Google address validation for that matter, and understand whether our data about a customer's address was the right thing or not, and be able to correct our information in case it was wrong. In some cases, it was straightforward, so our algorithm was able to update a lot of the information. But in other cases, it really required more of a human touch and someone who understood the business context of how we were dealing with our customer. And that's where the whole concept of data stewards came in, because these were key people from across the organization who really understood how and when and in what context this information was being used. And that enabled us to get business logic and rules, which we were then able to go back and fix or implement as part of our solution. So the next time you got the same problem, we had the ability, because we had the rule in place, to be able to deal with that data automatically and get it right. And what this meant was we had aligned data, which was much better quality compared to the data you had in your source system. And this is the information we pushed back into our data lake, such that at this point, if anyone, any of our data scientists, or even anyone who wanted reporting on that data lake had access to better quality and higher aligned data to be able to make business decisions. The other thing which we also found out from this process was as we were measuring the data quality and the inconsistencies, we were then able to go back and do a root cause analysis and understand what is the reason because of which we are getting these problems in the first place into our ecosystem. And often it was a case of, well, maybe there was a broken process, maybe there was a tool limitation, or maybe it was just a lack of training from a people perspective, or it could be a combination of all of those. But by identifying the root cause, we were able to go back, address the issue in the source system such that when the data came back again after fixing the information, we were able to see the difference it was making. And by following this through a cyclic process, we were able to improve our data quality and enhance our data alignment over time. The way we addressed the second challenge, which was around having multiple data sources and each of them with a different structure, was we actually followed common information model approaches, which we already had in place, but they weren't being used to the extent that were needed. And also in things like master data structure where they were missing, we actually took it on to define those master data structures in the absence of anyone else doing it, because that meant we knew if going forward everyone was going to use that product structure, we weren't going to have further data misalignments because we had now a master reference in place that people could use to build new solutions such that we weren't further increasing the amount of misalignment and data quality issues we had across the company. The next item was around the fact that we had standard data definitions which were missing. And for this, we really used our data governance mechanism. We created a three-tiered structure where we had data custodians at a platform level that were able to identify and fix issues that were coming up at a platform level. We then had our data stewards who were responsible for defining certain data standards which were across applications or more functional. And at the end on the top of the tier, we had our data policy owners. We were able to go through a data governance committee and get decisions on things which were impacting the wider organization across the board. And once we had those decisions in place, we were able to then propagate those accordingly to the rest of the organization to make sure they were being adopted, and we were able to measure that. In terms of my second last challenge, which was around the lack of a single source of truth and the ability to have a platform that could run analytics, we decided to bring all the data that we had in our source systems into this single data lake. And like I said earlier, we did that by enhancing our data quality and aligning the data. So now you had all the information in a single place in a data lake such that people didn't have to go through the same struggle of getting the information, trying to make sense of it. They actually had a platform where the information was available and they could make the most use of out of it. And the last challenge, which actually compared to the others wasn't really that difficult, was around having a scalable, low-cost, high-performing platform. Because we went from on-premises and we decided to move to a cloud, so it was quite an easy transition for us. And that meant we no longer had to worry about the platform or the underlying infrastructure, and our focus was purely based on how do we make the most use of the data and address the challenges from a data perspective, and not having to worry about the underlying infrastructure. And with that, it kind of brings me to the key journey or learnings we've had along the way. And there are four I really want to call out here. And the first one is, don't try to boil the ocean. Start small and build iteratively. Now, luckily, in our case, we were delivering all of this through agile methodologies, or SAFe in particular, which stands for Scaled Agile Framework. And that naturally meant we had to be very focused on small iterative builds. But that really helped us because that meant we weren't going away for a long period of time, coming back with something that was maybe no longer even needed by the organization. But by building small and delivering benefits on a regular cycle, we were able to show that data transformation was making a difference and the business challenges it was really addressing. So the lesson I learned was data transformation, when you look at things to start off, it might seem quite complicated, quite massive. It's about how do you identify a small area that's well contained, but you can actually see yourself delivering fairly quickly. And once you've done that, you move on to the next thing and you keep on building iteratively such that once you've done that a few times, you have that snowball effect where everyone sees the value that you're bringing in and is really becomes a promoter for the transformation initiative. So again, don't try to take on the big problem. Identify a small area and see what difference you can make and keep on at it, keep on building on top of it. My second learning is more from a financial perspective, but it's find positive return on investment use cases because a few quick wins, especially at the start of the journey, are really needed. Now, when you start your data transformation, you'll have financial pressures to make sure you're getting some return on investment, because in the initial stages, you'll be setting up a data lake or you'll be setting up data governance, and you won't immediately see any returns coming through. And that's where it's important to keep away that financial pressure of, is this just investment which isn't going to make any returns, by identifying some quick wins that you can show. And as you're starting from where you are towards your North Star of where you want to be, you want to deliver different beneficial use cases as you get towards your destination. So really identify those quick wins, and it'll help not only your stakeholders, but also keep the financial stakeholders happy with where the money is being invested. My second last learning is more from a culture perspective. So as part of what we did, we had a strategy in place, and we were fairly confident about the strategy because we had the ability to run it across multiple stakeholders, get buy-in, and run it across some very clever minds. But the real challenge was, how do you implement it? And we realized, actually, unless you really push or focus on the culture piece, it's not going to be that easy to do. So you can have the best strategy in place, but unless you take people along that journey and you really change the culture of the organization, it's going to be a really hard sell. For me, the key example was data quality, because when we started things off, we started reporting on data quality that I talked about earlier in my presentation. And when we took those numbers back, it didn't really mean anything to the people. But then we had to make sure people realized how that bad data quality was having an impact for our customers, and it was having an impact in terms of our reporting capability and our ability to understand the business in more detail. And it was only once that was done, they really understood how what they were doing was making a bigger difference later on as part of the customer's journey. So it was really about addressing the culture, and strategy was getting enabled once we took people on that journey with us. So summary for me is, you can have a great strategy, but it's really about the business change and the culture piece, which you need to make sure you address. Otherwise, it's going to be quite an uphill battle. And my last slide, quite a key one for me, is really how you go with the flow and you provide alternates to shadow implementations. So when you start off your data initiative, and in most of the cases, you will already have different parts of the organization trying to address the challenges around data in the absence of a centralized, let's say, capability or a transformation program. And the key is, when you start things off, you don't go head on against these initiatives, but actually join forces. And what I mean by that is, the reason why there's this shadow implementation is because there is a need for data. There are people who really desire this information. And the aim is, how do you work alongside them? How do you understand the challenges they have, such that you can provide a solution? And once you do that for 1, 2, or 3 areas, again, you'll have that snowball effect, because these people are really doing those shadow implementations because they have a need for that data. And if you can address that need, they'll be really happy to go back to their core service, core business, and deliver that without having to worry about everything to do with data at the end of the day. And with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. I hope you found that useful. If you want to get in touch, my contact details are there on the TM Forum website. Thank you for listening. And with that, I'll hand it back to the studio. Thank you.
Zahid, thank you very much. Yes, please do use the networking tab on the website to get in touch with any of our speakers. And incidentally, you may have realised Zahid's been in the chat window answering questions, and will still be there if you want to have a direct chat with him. Jay, what do you reckon to what Zahid was saying was happening at Vodafone?
Well, first, it's very good to see Vodafone actually start developing this area. It's taken a while, but at least they're really pushing in on this, which is great. And he's absolutely right in addressing the single source of truth. And especially when you're embarking on this AI journey, if you need to have access to data. And I know in an industry where there is ample amount of data, and you kind of wonder why that statement is being made, is because you have all these data silos. And there's a lot of stoppage between getting access to that information. But once you get access to that information, it's how you map it, you structure it, you categorize it, and then you put it together into a data lake. And if you don't do it correctly, you're going to end up with a data swamp, and you're not going to be able to use it.
You don't want the swamp, you want the lake, you want the nice clear area that you can see through and get exactly what you want. Thank you for all your questions, by the way. Jay, I know you've been answering lots of questions online as well. What's the general thoughts and feelings been there?
Well, some of the questions related to the what type of GPU that you need to use for AI models. It's not the answer to that is very much it's a how long is a piece of string, because I've designed systems where you don't really need GPU for some of the aspects of the models, and other aspects you really need a lot of it. So it really depends on what you're trying to do before you start looking at the technology. So start looking at the objectives that you're trying to meet, look at the models that you're trying to build, what type of insights you're trying to draw out, and then you figure out exactly what type of technology you need to put into place in order to start building these solutions.
Yeah, it's great though to have that conversation going on online, even if it is how long is a bit of string, but at least the conversation is certainly being started and no doubt will be carried on as well. Fascinating presentation next. We're going to talk about privacy and where the line is, where the privacy boundary is when you are dealing with and looking at data collection. What's useful, what is actually just a bit too intrusive. Here's Steve Monahan from finmere.ai.
Data and privacy have to be about the hottest topics on the planet right now. What's happening with data is truly amazing. 3 core laws of technology are intersecting, creating growth that exceeds what we usually know about Moore's law. So Moore's law states that processing power doubles every 18 months for the same cost. Metcalfe's law is the law of networks. It says that the value of a network grows at the square of the participants. And what we're seeing with Metcalfe's law is an explosion in networks, data, sensors, IoT. And so this huge amount of a tsunami of data flowing in and starting to permeate throughout our society. And then off to the side of that, you have Kreider's law. Kreider's law is the law of storage, and it says that storage doubles every 13 months for the same cost. So you have 3 exponential laws colliding to create the very framework for what drives artificial intelligence. So if you think about Moore's law, Metcalfe's law, and Kreider's law, it's really our ability to assimilate learning into data. So often in that data doesn't have to be direct knowledge data. We can often derive data and come out and synthesize that data into new insights. But the challenge as we do that is the ethical boundaries. While all data and all technology can be used for good, often it can be used for the wrong intent. And I think that that's a very fine line. There's a fine line between intelligence and invasiveness. And I think that what you see in applications around the world are both sides of that equation in play, from a cybersec security standpoint, but equally from the greater good that you can do through that data in arriving at vaccines, as we know through Corona today, all sorts of information that we can start gleaning and solving some of the biggest problems in the world. And that opportunity is really what I'll focus on today. If we look at the insurance industry, I was involved and I set up an AI company a few years ago that started to look at underwriting. And it had a fantastic intent. The intent was very simple. What our goal was to move the insurance industry from protection to prevention, because who doesn't prefer to actually prevent from getting sick or prevent in today's society from Corona from getting infected? Who wouldn't want to actually stop that illness happening ahead of time rather than remediating that after the event, going to a doctor and trying to get that sorted out later? So we embarked on that journey, and of course we started synthesizing initially primary data. So as we started to weed through all that data, we started all the data that insurance companies collect. There were over 609 initial data points that underwriters use for underwriting in the life and health industry. As we started to synthesize that data down with all of our models, we started to work out that there were only 73 material data points that actually made a difference in underwriting. And so if you look at the flip side of that equation, that we were actually going out to customers and acquiring a lot more data from them than was actually required to do the task at hand. And this had 2 core impacts. The first is it created about a $1.75 billion liability, because about 50% of inbound business into insurance companies are lost due to complexity. So that additional burden of actually inquiring for too much data from customers actually created this huge liability. The second part of that is, of those, 50 out of 100 didn't buy, 38% would never buy. So they were actually excluding themselves from service because it was just all too difficult. And really the opportunity through synthesizing data with AI was that you could dramatically simplify that equation down to about 73 data points. And that's before you started to look at synthetic data, how you could derive data, how you could arrive at an answer without having to ask a question. And we figured that if we could actually start accessing telco data, we could probably remove that huge burden of about the 609 data points, and we could get away with possibly 3 questions. So the power of data is pretty impressive. But what we also discovered in that process is when you're running AIs over fixed data sets, at some point you end up with a very simple algorithm and you no longer require AI. What you need to do, though, is when you get to that point, is to start looking at alternate data sets that start proving your baseline out. So how to acquire different sorts of information that we could start using to offset that data requirement in terms of asking customers, but also learning new things that could help move and shift the industry from protection to prevention. So we undertook a fairly simple process where we started with deep learning models. Then the next, we started to go to more traditional sorts of models that would be explainable for regulators and explainable for underwriters. And when we ran all of our models, we found that we ended up with a 1% misclassification rate, which meant that the machine made a different decision to the human underwriter in 1% of cases. Now, this was entirely expected and below our thresholds and all the goals that we'd set with the underwriters and actuaries beforehand. The challenge was that our results were in some ways too good. We automated 90% of the process and automated and simplified 90% of the requirement. So if you take that out, you've got to ask, well, what's the role of the underwriters and the actuaries going forward? And when we went through that process, that 1% became an insurmountable problem, because what we realized was that even though the questions and the answers through technology were logical and defensible, what we didn't account for was the human side of that equation. So how we actually manage human emotion, because humans tend to make emotional decisions and then they support those decisions with logic, and then they'll take action when they're easy. What we did is we flipped the AI into a way that was not intended to be used, but we started to assess the misclassification rates of the human being. And what we discovered was that human misclassification was sitting up at about 38% versus our 1% for the machine. And what that meant is simply that 1 + 1 = 2.76. It meant that actuaries and underwriters were making different decisions based on whether it was before lunch, Friday afternoon, or month-end close. And so when we think about it, there are 2 sides to that. One is from the consumer perspective, that now if you've got a machine judging, that you're going to be judged in a very consistent way that you can rely on it, and that it's not going through and asking you for too many personal details. But then on the flip side of that equation, you can look at it from an alternative perspective. And that is that as you start to use synthetic data and you start to really troll through, you're able to discover things that you don't know that people know about you. So if you start synthesizing other data points, from sound alone, we can determine if you're manic depressive, schizophrenic, diabetic, or have a heart condition. It's quite frightening what you can learn from data. And if you think about it, that raises a whole lot of ethical questions. So if you're a bank and you have call center data, should you be allowed to medically diagnose customers? Now, there are some good applications of that. You could determine whether, if you're dealing with someone that's manic depressive or schizophrenic, that's obviously an important thing to know from a risk perspective, and equally important for customer protection to make sure that they're actually doing things that they're cognizant of and in a rational frame of mind. But at what point do you cross that line? And I think that that's one of the most interesting things that we see in data today, is the ethical boundaries and who calls it. We've seen these issues discussed in Facebook. We've seen them in presidential debates. But what that synthetic data enables you to do is gain all sorts of insight that we're not aware of even ourselves that we're yielding. So when we start looking out into the real world and start looking at how we apply, I think that we have to bring things back to an ethical framework and an intention framework. And the intention for me from a data perspective, whether it's in banking or insurance or any other application, is to look at how you can actually serve to add value to the customer. And then obviously there's the derivation of that, which is how you can make that model sustainable and of course build value from the data for the company. But that ethical boundary sits within the human realm. This is not something that machines judge themselves on. So this is something that humans do, and humans are the most likely people or the most likely part of that value chain to actually fail. And that's the challenge that we see with data today. The abundance of it is amazing. If you have a look, and if you look at the number of camera sensors in the world, you're seeing this massive exponential growth, not only in the number of sensors that you see around the world, but also in the quality and depth of data that these sensors are picking up. And these sensors are becoming pervasive, from the smartwatches on our wrists, to the phones that we're wearing, to the earplugs that we have in our ears that are measuring our heartbeats. We are just emanating data every moment of the day. And how we look at data and how we make our decisions is really up to human beings. And human beings, as we know, can be way too fallible. So if we're looking to go and set those boundaries within an industry, and if we're looking at how to turn data for good, we must equally work out what the protections we can put in place in terms of managing that. And that there are no hard and fast rules about, other than those that are given from regulatory guidelines. But even though the rate of innovation far exceeds the rate of regulation. So much of the responsibility comes back to the ethical standards and the trust with which the companies that you give your data to can operate. So in summary, humans are the weakest link in any technology. So generally, technology doesn't fail because of technology, it fails because of human friction, in the same way that politics, emotional decisions come to play over logical decisions. Setting auditable frameworks in terms of setting boundaries and understanding the tolerance levels of which you accept, the boundaries of which you put it for your examination of data and your use of data. And I think the most important thing is always to have a purpose that's very clear in terms of how that data is going to be used to enhance customer value or to solve an issue that really either removes risk, cost, or friction from a process for customers. So with that, I thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. Some really interesting ideas that he was talking about there, and bringing it back to the ethics. And I loved his example. Just because a bank can tell from your data what type of person you are, should we be saying that the bank can, read that into it? The whole of the ethics of this, where you draw the boundary. What did you think, Jay?
Yeah, ethics is extremely important. We're moving at a super fast pace in this area, and building solutions that actually start mimicking human intelligence, and it's going to start making decisions. And so ethics, moral, all of these aspects need to be taken into account. In fact, I'm one of the co-authors and contributors to an amazing government project. It's Singapore government is one of the first ones in the world to actually launch this. It's an artificial intelligence ethics and governance guide, body of knowledge, and it's helping companies to understand that yes, you're building AI solutions, you're building these products that's going to mimic human intelligence, and it's going to help you make better decisions, but do take into account the ethics aspect of it and making sure that you're really complying with that.
It was fascinating to hear Steve go over it, and it's really nice sometimes to get that sort of that sobering voice that sort of says, just because this is there, actually what do we want to do with it? And these are obviously questions that are being debated and being talked about at the moment. Thanks for all your comments, by the way, in the chat window. Please keep them coming, keep voting on our polls. We've got another poll to come, which I'll get Jay to discuss the results of shortly, and there is still a lot more to come. You're watching the Digital Transformation World Series.
Introducing Doxy Home OS and Doxy Router, an AI-powered cloud-native home operating system, revolutionizing the home broadband experience with more intelligent support. Alexa, ask Doxy why Netflix is stalling.
It seems your son is downloading some really heavy files.
Doxy prioritizing Netflix. More intelligent control. more intelligent security. Doxy, more connectivity for Generation More.
We're going to look now at a new approach to data and AI and wrapping them all up together. And it's one of the panels that Jay has moderated. So over to you.
Thank you, Sasha. I'd like to welcome you all. And I'd like to welcome Dan Nathan, who is the Vice President and Head of Enterprise Data Office for Globe Telecom, which is the largest mobile operator in the Philippines. Dan is essentially a technologist who focused on data and analytics over the last 5 years. But before Globe Telecom, he was a managing director at Accenture, providing consulting and systems integration in the communications, media, and technology sector. We're also joined by Gil Rosen, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for Amdocs. And for many years, Gil has been always innovating and creating concepts that he has personally taken from ideation to market launch. And before joining Amdocs, he was the Chief Marketing Officer and Innovation Officer for Bezet, which is Israel's leading telecom provider. Communications service providers are used to transform their businesses, from being providers of connectivity to providers of technology platforms and delivering a full 360-degree customer experience. And with the rise of 5G and edge computing, helping to drive even more data-driven, hyper-personalized experiences, it is now more important than ever to analyze the data available in your organization and to help make data-driven decisions during your transformation. In this session, both Dan and Gil will discuss how telcos can redefine themselves and share a new approach to using data and AI. Gil, can you please share with us your experience as a Chief Marketing Officer of a leading service provider and telling us about how you analyze the data that was available to you and how you used artificial intelligence, machine learning?
Great, thank you, Jay. So my experience with machine learning and AI, I think, started somewhere around 2016, 17. And we launched a new product to market, to the consumer market. And after a few months that we were selling, we actually took the data of the customers who bought the service, and we took about 60 data points. And and my team and I started to work on data models and machine learning models that would help us predict who would be the best next customers to target for this new product. And then it took a few, or several weeks, a few months to actually build the model. And once we finally trained the machine learning models and we started to get results, actually the impact on the ability to convert customers to buy was unbelievable. Almost not credible in the numbers I was used to, from having a single-digit percentage conversion rate to double-digit and a significant double-digit. And that got me to start to really believe on the potential profound impact machine learning and AI can have on the business. Now, there was a big problem because we did all this kind of bootstrapped. We didn't have platforms that could really help us. It took weeks, as I explained before, if not months. The results we got were actually assembled or created an Excel sheet of potential customers. We handed over this to the sales unit. It wasn't embedded. So while on one side we figured out let's call it the mathematics or the machine learning algorithms worked, the operational side of it and the scalability side of it was non-existent. And also getting the data and cleansing the data and the relationship between my marketing business department and the IT department of this entire process was very tense. So that got me started on the journey of being a true believer. And then of course we used it more and more. On the other side, I realized the significant impact real and comprehensive systems can have on actually scaling this and making the business impact that we want to make on our market.
Thank you, Gil. 2016, that was when everybody thought that AI was normally used for autonomous cars and stuff like that, and it was not yet the buzzword. I mean, today we hear it all the time. But 2016, that's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. Dan, from your point of view, where do you think service providers are, with struggling with the use of data and AI?
Yeah. So Jay, we started our data and analytics journey about 5 years ago, and I must say there are two things we needed to crack in order to leverage on AI. The very first one is basic, having data that is reliable and that business can trust. We started with data in silos and very level poor of quality, and the only way to really crack that was creating a data governance council with sponsorship from the CTIO, Chief Commercial Experience Officer, your business heads. And it is in this council that we had a forum to make decisions together, to float the issues across the different business units, and then to align on priorities and get buy-in. And that kind of started the momentum. And, I must say we started with a lot of data cleanup efforts, and there are data quality scores that we moved from 55% to 93%, and for customer demographics from 88%, which is relatively good, but we've been able to move that up to 99%. And all of these things have to happen in order to just get trust and buy into the data that we have. So we went through that cycle. Another cycle that we went through is really from a technology and tools perspective, right? We know that there's a plethora of tools available out there, and they keep changing, and every year you get new ones. But to me, when you're running an AI system, it's like operating a conveyor system, right? You always feed data coming at varying speeds. You have data in batch, you have data in motion, and the load in this conveyor system keeps getting heavier because you're always loading new data. Your products need to also increase, from your basic insights to AI models. And the hard part is, how do you make sure you have all your balls and all the system running well-oiled? Because if you don't, it's very difficult to make a change with all things moving without making a big business impact. So, we really have to find talent to have a technology strategist within the organization to begin with. We invested on a sandbox and R&D environment where you can play around with tools, do your interoperability tests, do your high performance checks early. So these are, I must say, two things that we have to deal with to just earn the right to be able to talk about AI and deployments and results.
And thank you for sharing that. That's incredible. I mean, you're right. You start with data governance because, when you start breaking down the silos and merging data, it's you've got to clean it up and mapping and structuring and everything else. And data privacy is very, very important. So approaching from a data governance from the stakeholder perspective was it's incredible. Thank you, Gail. In order to embark on an AI journey, you need to strike the right balance between the data quantity and data quality. How did you manage in your last role, and what were you working on, and what are you working on now to help telcos?
Okay, so first of all, I think it's clear also from what Dan said that there's a sentence that AI is 90% logistics. It's not just about the machine learning algorithms. I've walked into many offices where I see a lot of data scientists, and the fact that you have these skill sets and people is very important, but that's not how you succeed. And that's the first thing that I learned in my previous role, is that we actually need to invest in the platforms. As time goes by, as the telecommunication industry evolves, where you have the emergence of IoT, 5G, so there's another network now joining, right? There are many more devices now joining, many new services that are now being launched. All this and the ability to actually aggregate everything becomes more challenging as time goes by. And when it comes to actually making a decision, you actually have to understand that a decision is not about looking at one vertical and then just making a decision on that vertical, but it's about actually looking at what we call looking at things from the top and actually understanding what is the optimal decision for the organization. I'll give you an example from my previous role. I'm a chief marketing officer and I launch a product. I want to sell as much of that product as possible. On the other hand, I might be creating two new issues. One, maybe on the network side, I'm disregarding any network impact of the product launch. B, I might be causing, for whatever reason, an influx of calls to the call center, which create costs. Now, that means that the aggregation and the real cost of launching that product has to consider network information and the data coming from the network, what is the impact on the network and what is the impact on the call center. That means that our decision-making has to consider all these different aspects. And that's what we're working on from Amdocs' perspective. We call that AI on top. That's a kind of our concept of letting service providers to actually understand the impact of their business, whether on the operational side or on the business side, not by just looking at the industry really went to these vertical use cases, AI being deployed in the network, AI being deployed in call centers, AI being deployed in e-commerce. But that's the next generation of AI has to live on top and make a decision. By the way, like our organism called the body has one brain, right? We don't have a brain for a hand and the brain for a leg. We have one brain governing everything. So AI will have to govern the entire organization, and we have to make optimal decisions, or at least understand the impact of a decision on one side on what it does on the other. And that's a very important aspect of the platforms that we are now building in Amdocs to allow our customers to make the best decisions possible.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Dan, how did Go Telecom embark on the journey to become a data-centric and data decision-making organization?
Yeah, and I like the concept that Gil describes on AI on top. And to me, what I focus on is how do you make AI models that are deployed and are operationalized? This is actually the harder part for me. I think we went through a phase where initially there were more demands of AI models than I can produce. Then it shifted because I now have the data established with all of the tools that are out there, and we grew our base of data scientists. So now you can easily produce scores and answers, right? But what do you do then after that? The harder part is being able to embed these models in your day-to-day operations where, as your customer is using your app or as you're going through network planning, all of these things are applied. So to me, that's kind of the harder part. I know I've heard analysts say that it's nearly 50% of models that are deployed, right? So in our case, we put focus on defining ahead what success looks like for a model, and also planning ahead on how you might deploy it. And this requires a different type of skill. It's not just your data scientists. You need full stack software engineering skills to be able to deploy this. So for me, that's one area of focus. Another area of focus for me, because it's always a balance of technology and people, right, is bridging your silo between a technology team and a business team. Because at the end of the day, they need to have a common language and common understanding to be able to deploy models. And to us, we did a number of things. First is, in my organization, I defined an analytics advocate role. This is where an executive with a fairly good balance of domain and business understanding, as well as specialization on data science, acts as a translator of sorts between the business and technology. So this person sits in the management team of both, and can advocate, can influence, and can make things simpler. So that was one of the things we did. We also created agile analytical pods that are cross-functional. So you bring your business people together, your product people, your IT people, and your data people. So together they work on a project. Then it gives them a sense of success. It opens up the communication beyond this pod to the rest of the organization. So the bridging between the two groups becomes easier. So I think it's equally important to look at this aspect when launching AI.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Gil, we've got a couple more questions before we have to wrap up the session, but we want to hear what you're doing at Amdocs from a data and AI strategy, and how you're looking to empower businesses through this journey, and also what sort of vision are you painting for telcos and AI, and what do you think the future holds for them?
Thank you for that. So what we're doing in Amdocs is actually we have created a platform And one of the things that Dan mentioned is kind of the life cycle that is required in order to launch a model. What we do is not just bring a technology. I mean, the technology is important, but because of our global experience and our understanding on areas from the network all the way to the customer experience, when we approach a customer, we actually bring the platform together with a prepackaged library of KPIs already embedded. We took very special care, and this is sometimes disregarded, of the UI, the customer experience of the users who are going to be accessing the data. AI doesn't need to be an enigma. AI needs to be something every product manager, every marketing manager, and definitely the CX level need to look at a dashboard and understand their numbers.
Yeah.
So we took special care of the usability of the platform and the ability to look also behind the numbers, because sometimes when you see a result, you're thinking, how did they come up with this number? So we really give this kind of drill down capability. So the platform really allows our customers from what we call it the 0-day value. From day one from the first day that it's implemented, they can already start getting access to answers. Now, on a long term, what we see is what I would like telcos to look at from a journey perspective is, first of all, how they move their data to the cloud, or this is kind of the aggregation of data, and the cloud is where data is aggregated. Then create these, I would say, data networks where you consolidate all these different pools of information that you get from the network all the way from the digital side of the experience. And at the end of the day, then have this platform with the AI on top, kind of a paradigm that enables you to get the answer. So you need to move through these 3 steps: the cloud, data, and then the AI. And then when you have the right tools and people working with you, and everything that Dan mentioned regarding also governance and all these different advocates, I think things can move much faster.
Thank you. I love that approach in CDA. That's a great. Hopefully it catches on. Dan, from while moving forward, what is Global's vision and the future look like?
Yeah, I think our ambition, if I'm going to put it simply, is for every job function at Globe to benefit from analytics, right? Well, I think you have your areas that are front runners in here. You have your marketing, your network, your product, right? But we want equally our HR, our finance, our sales people, our facilities people to also adopt these technologies and apply AI in their day-to-day. So that's our ambition. And for me, there are 2 things that we're doing to get closer to this ambition. The first one is this concept of a minimum viable data. How do we have minimum viable data in the organization? And for me, MVD doesn't mean you don't get through your big data journey, but you actually go through your big data journey so you can get your network data, your sales data, your customer data together in one place. But out of this big data, then you find and curate this very vital data and put them together in minimum viable data. And you almost put this at the fingertips of your decision makers. You put it in a way that's accessible. If you don't have technical people, you can augment it with, there are Ask Data and different kinds of augmented analytics forums. So for me, providing MVD to the group and also supporting it with an organization-wide analytics academy where we define each career track and people can say, I want to become better as a big data engineer or a data analyst or a data scientist. And then they have a forum to just learn and grow.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Dan. We've heard, thank you both, Gil and Dan, and we've heard some main things here: AI on top, CDA, and the minimum viable data. These are great concepts, and we've got to, and from a telco perspective, absolutely, as Dan had also mentioned, start from the governance perspective and start breaking it down from there. And Gil, you're right. AI should be usable from every department in the entire organization. And at least the outputs and actually be able to see that through a dashboard would be awesome. Thank you all for listening. And now we'll head back to the studio. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. Nice chatting with you. See you again.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.
Jay, thanks very much. very friendly panel, I have to say, there at the end. You're all having a great conversation. What would you like viewers to take away from that? Because you went over a lot of stuff. Yeah, they clearly know their AI. So what would you like people to take away from it?
There's a lot here. I think if you look at one of the polls where what are the current obstacles in bringing on board AI, and it's about lack of understanding of AI technologies and how they work. We've heard from two amazing speakers just now, and if you look from Gil's perspective, he was a chief marketing officer, and in 2016 he embarked on an AI journey. This is a time when most venture capitalists were still thinking that AI could be used for autonomous vehicles as opposed to building platforms that actually can help your business. So that was really forward thinking back then, and the way he applied it, and just being open-minded. And Dan kind of puts it really beautifully by saying it's about minimum viable data. And we've heard that before with Finn Mirai and Steve talking about the minimum amount of data that he needed to be able to make the right decisions. So being able to do that was incredible, and also applying the right sort of structure. So you're going from governance perspective. You're putting in you talk to the right stakeholders, making sure from a top-down perspective they actually understand the importance of bringing on AI, and bringing on board the people that understand AI, and that's incredible. And by seeing what these two have actually achieved.
Jay, you mentioned the polls that we were running there. Thank you for voting. They're still open actually, but so far, the one Jay mentioned, what are the current obstacles in bringing on board AI? We've got sort of, two out in front. Hard to integrate AI projects with existing projects, processes and systems, but then just edging just ahead, lack of understanding of AI technologies and how they work. It's more education, more knowledge sharing, more case study visibility, I guess, Jay. That's what's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, getting to a point that just because you don't have the knowledge internally, do bring on people that actually can contribute to your organization, and learn to sort of think out of the box and literally just experiment.
We have got an absolute treat for you now. I mean, take everything that you've heard and that you've watched so far, and now let's sort of throw it into the future and get the view of someone who really knows his stuff when it comes to talking about AI. 4 decades of life in Silicon Valley. He's certainly been there and done that, and delighted to say that he's talking to Nick Willis. Thomas Siebel, CEO of C3.ai.
So now it's my pleasure to introduce a very special guest to this Digital Transformation World series. A serial entrepreneur who has been in the business for more than 4 decades, a household name through his pioneering work in launching the CRM industry, and an Entrepreneur of the Year 3 times, as well as one of the 6 most effective philanthropists in the world. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome Tom Siebel, Chairman and CEO of C3.ai. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Nick.
Good to be with you today. So what's new with you? C3.ai, please do start by telling us a little bit about what it's all about.
C3.ai is an enterprise application software company, and we generally address this opportunity of enterprise AI. So we have spent the last decade and say order of $1 billion building a technology stack that is a set of software services called the C3 AI suite that we apply across a wide range of industries in oil and gas and energy, utilities, manufacturing, precision health, defense, intelligence, what have you, to apply AI to business processes and government processes in a way to accrue a substantial economic and social benefit.
So that's a significant bet to place there, Tom. I mean, $1 billion invested in AI, but this isn't your first rodeo, as it were, and so you're clearly pretty confident in the role that AI is going to play. I wanted to put that in the context of the digital transformation book, a Wall Street Journal bestseller that you launched last year. In it, you talk about the period of corporate mass extinction and the importance of a series of technologies, cloud compute, big data, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things, to really powering this next wave of transformation. Now, these are technologies which the telecom industry is grappling with, is very familiar with, as it is with digital transformation. Tell us a bit, if you would, about how you see the role of the telecom industry in this transformed world run by AI.
Well, as you mentioned, this is my fourth decade in the information technology industry, and I studied out of grad school. I went to work for a small startup called Oracle Corporation. And at the time, the worldwide market for information technology was about $200 billion. Oracle was about $2 million organization. So 4 decades later, the information technology business is roughly $2.7 trillion, and the growth is accelerating. And so we have really, 5 technologies that are accelerating the growth in information technology. And these include, as you mentioned, elastic cloud computing, big data, the Internet of Things, okay, and importantly, broadband with communications and especially 5G. And these in turn enable us to solve classes of applications that were previously unsolvable in the area of predictive analytics. And so we're able to apply these technologies to really enormous social and economic benefit in, manufacturing optimization, in customer churn, production optimization, stochastic optimization, inventory, fraud detection, okay, what have you. And so this is a kind of mega trend as we power into the 21st century. This issue of digital transformation has risen to the top of virtually every CEO's agenda, and so it is fully game on in a highly dynamic, rapidly changing, fascinatingly complex, and enormously interesting field of digital transformation.
Thanks, Tom. I think that topic of transformation, though, is one that a lot of companies are really struggling with how to get traction on. So there's no lack of awareness in the telecom industry of the need to transform, but breaking away from decades of legacy technology and ways of working and a mindset of perhaps controlling everything rather than being part of an ecosystem is a challenging one to break. So how do you see that role of telecoms in the future? Do you think that 5G would be on your list of technologies that's just as important, or is it taken as read that the right connectivity will be there?
Well, when I wrote the book, Digital Transformation, I kind of took 5G for granted, and that was probably a mistake because 5G is clearly an enabler here. And, as this kicks in globally, the rate of acceleration and adoption of AI and adoption of digital transformation will accelerate much further. So there's a huge role for the CSPs to play in this, and as technology providers. In addition, the CSPs will use these technologies internally to change the way that they deliver products. I mean, what are natural applications of AI in the telecommunications business? Well, customer churn, for example. We'll be able to predict, today we can predict customer churn in the telecommunications industry with very, very high levels of precision, months and months in advance of the customer leaving, so that the provider can, intervene and avoid the churn and avoid the cost of acquiring a new customer. AI-based predictive maintenance will be enormously important in this 5G infrastructure to keep it live and viable and avoid systems outages, to provide, the service levels that the customers will demand. And the service levels that they will demand as it relates to AI will be, think for kind of 4 nines of reliability. So these are kind of natural applications of AI internally, but this also represents a big business opportunity because all of these deployments in oil and gas, defense, intelligence, utilities, retailing are going to be highly dependent upon the availability of these 5G technologies.
Now, let's just drill a little bit further into that, Tom. You talked there about the need for AI as an enabling tool for operators to really move fast enough. And we'd absolutely subscribe to that in TM Forum as well, that you simply can't keep pace with the customer demand. You can't achieve the right cost economics for your business if you're not able to automate as far as you possibly can on the internal operations. But doing that when you've got 30, 40, 50 years of legacy technologies in many cases, and institutional ways of working and culture and so on, this raises a lot of concerns for operators. What would be your advice to those listening today thinking about how do I really get to that AI nirvana you're describing?
Well, we do business with some of the largest companies in the world and some of the most successful AI deployments and digital transformations going on in the world at places like Engie and now Koch Industries, Baker Hughes, Shell, and what have you. And virtually every one of our customers tried once or twice or three times to build this technology stack themselves with their IT organization. Now, this is not new in the information technology business. When we brought Oracle to market, say in the early 1980s, most IT organizations were going to build their own relational database system. Well, how many organizations succeeded at that? That would be none. And then when we brought enterprise application software to market in the 90s, think ERP, think manufacturing automation systems, think CRM, virtually every company through their IT organization, and they might have 10 or 20 or 30,000 programmers in Bangalore or wherever, or Munich, everybody tried to build these applications themselves. I mean, how many companies, including the CSPs, okay, how many companies succeeded at building their own ERP system? Well, that would be none. Okay, so after they take 2 or 3 efforts at it, they would always come back to Oracle or SAP or Siebel to buy these technologies, and whether it be database or CRM or ERP or whatever it might be. As it relates to digital transformation, I mean, digital transformation is about applying predictive analytics across all aspects of the value chain of every industry we can think of: travel, transportation, aerospace, oil and gas, utilities, automotive, whatever it might be. And again, virtually every one of our customers tries to build this themselves because this is what IT organizations do. Some have spent, I think in the case of GE, I think they spent, $6 billion over 10 years. So frequently it gets into hundreds of millions. Sometimes it gets into billions. But then, they tend to throw in the towel and after a few failed efforts and deal with a professional enterprise software provider. And then they find they can deploy these solutions quite rapidly.
That's quite an accurate description of a lot of what happens in the telecom industry. For many years, the not invented here industry and believing it can engineer that itself. But there's been a marked shift in the last 18 months to 2 years as we go on this transformation journey of welcoming in partners. I'm interested to hear how you see that partnership working on the second part of your argument for use of AI, which is that the telecom providers can actually be part of the solution package. So do you see a pathway here where telecom companies are not just providing connectivity, but are actually working with partners like C3 AI to go into many other industries and help them transform? Do you see that as a partnership for the future?
I think that, some leading telecommunication vendors, with vision, will see the opportunity for partnership, just like we reached out. We have very significant partnerships with, say, Microsoft and say Satya at Microsoft and Shantanu at Adobe and Arvind at IBM. And so these are the companies that we go to market with. In oil and gas, we go to market with Baker Hughes. Okay, in defense and intelligence, we go to market with Raytheon. In financial services, we go to market with FIS. And I think, and these are hugely, hugely successful initiatives. They're successful for Microsoft, successful for Adobe, successful for Baker Hughes, successful for C3, and most importantly, successful for our customers at places, let's say in oil and gas, like Shell and Flint Hills Research and LyondellBasell, what have you. So there will be visionary telecommunication companies that reach out now, and it's clear to them that will be clear that this is a staggeringly large opportunity. We're looking at we're looking at a software market opportunity alone in hundreds of billions of dollars. And so some visionary leaders will reach out and form partnerships with the leaders in this space and be part of the solution. And others will just kind of sit on the sidelines and, wait for somebody to order their 5G service, and they'll have they'll fulfill the service when they get the call. But I don't know who it will be, who will be out in front, but it's clear. I'm certain one or two of these companies will reach out and make sparks fly.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Now, it's a little hard to tell with the length of time we've been talking about AI exactly where we are in the hype cycle for this. There's so much expected from AI. I mean, the telecom industry is banking a lot internally, as we've said, but also on its future growth, on the availability of AI. Where do you think we are in the evolution journey of AI? Are we still early days?
Well, if you think back to the 90s, 96, 97, 98, 99, when we had all the dot-coms, and we thought we were way in excess of the hype cycle of the internet. Well, as of that time, we might have tapped, one fraction of 1% of the internet. Okay. And now, and so, as it relates to AI, if we're to look at this in the context of maybe, geologic time or even cosmologic time, where I'm not certain, when how many billions of years ago the Big Bang happened. I think it was 6 or 7 billion years ago. I think we're at about day 3. So this has a long way to go.
Right. So building on that, Tom, what do you see as the total potential for AI, and how long do you think it's going to take for that to play out in terms of impact on the world? You've talked in your book about the impact on every industry, on every aspect of society and life, and the power of this technology. But if we're on day 3, how long does it take us to get to a point of maturity, do you think?
Well, I think it will take 50 to 100 years for this to run its course. But if we think about what's happened in the information technology industry, say in the last 4 decades, where we've moved from mainframe computing to mini computing to personal computing, then to cloud computing, and we've moved from assembly level programming to advanced languages like Fortran, and then we had the introduction of relational database technology and enterprise application software, and now SaaS systems. So we've had all these evolutions of technology, and at every stage, we reached resistance in virtually every customer who wasn't going to use a mini computer, or wasn't going to use Ethernet, or wasn't going to use a personal computer. Well, all those people are gone, and any company that made that decision no longer exists. When you think about AI, you can think about what we're doing in predictive analytics in the commercial industrial world. You can think about this as an entire replacement market for everything we've done in enterprise application software in the last 3 decades. It's a big opportunity. And AI is being used by, leading organizations in medicine, in aerospace, in defense, in manufacturing, to fundamentally change everything about the way they do business. Let's take about a couple of opportunities. I think the largest opportunity for AI will be in the area of precision medicine. And by the way, this is, and so how will we use, what will the application be? We will aggregate the healthcare records and the genome sequences for the population of, name the country, say the United States, France, Germany, UK, doesn't matter. Aggregate those data into a unified federated image, and then we can build machine learning models that will predict with very high levels of precision who's going to be diagnosed with what disease in future years. And this gives us the opportunity to intervene clinically and avoid the diagnosis. Now, you combine this with the implications of telemedicine, where we're providing these services to a much broader and historically underserved audience. The economic and social benefits are staggering in terms of avoiding disease onset. A second area is AI-assisted medicine. I know we see all these bunk ads that the AI engine is going to replace physicians. Well, don't believe that for a minute, but it will most certainly inform physicians so they can make better informed and more accurate diagnoses. And then we'll get to treatment plans. The treatment protocols that we deploy will be genome-specific treatment plans that will be and that will be facilitated by these AI engines. So, this is an area that will be, I'm confident, the largest commercial application of AI. It will, uh, you know, fundamentally change everything about medicine, and the social and economic benefits are simply incalculable. And the telecommunication providers will provide a huge and important role in providing these solutions.
Now, medicine, of course, is something that's front of mind for all of us at the moment with the current situation in the world. So what you described there is a very compelling use case for AI, but it's also been a reminder in this time of the importance of being able to do things remotely as well. And I'd imagine that remote medicine, but also remote control for a lot of the industries you're working with, and AI playing a role in that, not just assisting the worker on the oil rig, but allowing that oil rig to be, for example, managed and monitored remotely is extremely important. So is that where you see the sort of fusion between the connectivity and the AI capabilities? Are there other areas where you see there's a point at which the technologies you're developing have to be brought together with technologies like 5G?
Well, everything that we're doing is on a complete collision with 5G, but I mean a collision in a enormously positive way, because the capability of 5G will just enormously accelerate the benefit for those who are engaging in whether it's specific AI projects or corporate-wise digital transformation. So 5G is critical there. 5G is clearly critical in as it relates to communications, where we have these kind of distance working models that are emerging, distance learning models that are emerging. So I think that there's an opportunity for one or more, visionary CSPs to step in front of this, to form partnerships with the leaders that are in this space, and be, in the driver's seat rather than on the train.
Thanks, Tom. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons why people might be hesitating in use of AI today. You mentioned it a little bit there. One of my favorite examples of new technologies coming is always when steam trains came along and people thought their bodies would start to decompose if they moved over 40 miles an hour. Do you think we're in a similar situation where the AI, there's fear over jobs, there's fear over the sort of Terminator, Skynet scenarios and so on? You've said there it's going to take up to 100 years for us to reach sort of true maturity of AI. What do you say to those who are pointing out fears or reasons why AI may be of concern?
Well, I think there are fears that are legitimate. I mean, there will be dislocation in many industries where people will need to be retrained, and if they're not retrained, they will lose their jobs. And this is not new. I mean, it happened with the advent of the Gutenberg press. It happened with the advent of the steam engine, the Jacquard loom. These two technologies brought on the Industrial Revolution. I mean, this replaced many, many, many jobs, and people either retrained themselves for the new economy or they became irrelevant. And this will happen here. So I think that there is a concern that AI will replace some jobs, and in fact it will. But just like the Industrial Revolution, just like the Gutenberg press and the resultant Reformation, it will create, an order 1 to 2 to 3 orders of magnitude more jobs than it will eliminate.
Now, picking up on the topic of regulation, you mentioned examples in medicine there, highly regulated industry, telecoms as well, feels like a highly regulated industry, and often that's a reason or an excuse for people not to do things. So when it comes to regulation and AI, and you're starting to work in some very heavy asset industries that have similar kinds of concerns, how do you see the role of regulation? Do we need regulation early in this cycle, or will that stifle innovation?
I think this is a great and critically important question, okay? The role of regulation in AI. And I think, where we've seen the collision of important technological advances and society, we've seen, important social and economic benefit, but also unanticipated consequences that were highly deleterious. Let's look, for example, at the invention of the Gutenberg press. Well, this enabled the Bible to be printed in multiple languages. The result was the Reformation. The result of that was, 100 years war, 30 years war. I mean, we just had wars, nonstop wars going on in Europe until the Treaty of Westphalia. Let's look at the Industrial Revolution. We have the invention of the steam engine and the Jacquard loom, which bring on the Industrial Revolution. Now, many people would argue this is a good thing. I would. We've created a lot of jobs. People live healthier. They live longer. The quality of life is better. At the same time, there were unanticipated consequences of the Industrial Revolution, of these technology inventions that were highly deleterious. I mean, think about, what happened in Western Europe with the initial Industrial Revolution, with these just horrific labor policies and child labor and labor abuses, okay, and pollution. The result of this, we had the labor unions that came out, which I think was a proper response to these successes. We had Marxism, communism, okay, the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I, World War II. All of these, I would argue, are consequences of the Industrial Revolution that were highly deleterious. Okay, now let's look at AI. I mean, when we get into AI, we will see, let's take the precision medicine example that we talked about. The benefits there are huge, they're beneficial, and they're like life-changing and world-changing. So it's all goodness and light, right? Well, let's think about this for a minute. Okay, somebody, either our insurance provider, or in the case of a place where we have socialized medicine, we might have a single care provider. I'm not sure which is worse. Will have access to all these data. How will that organization use these data? Okay, and the idea that these organizations, be it a government or be it a private enterprise, is going to act in a beneficial manner is, a little bit of a stretch. That's not the way this works. See Facebook for details. So let's think about this. I mean, do you want to, so this insurance provider, be it the government or United Healthcare or whoever it is going to know which of us is going to be diagnosed with a terminal disease in the next 5 years. Do you want to know that? I'm not sure I do. And how are they going to use this information? Okay, will they use this information to ration health care? Absolutely. Will they use it to set rates? Absolutely. Will they use it to deny health care? Absolutely. Who cares about pre-existing conditions when we know what you're going to be diagnosed with in the next 3 years? So the issues of how these data are used, are really troubling. When we look at the interaction of AI and social systems beyond medicine, let's talk about HR systems, for example, or criminal justice systems. We have the risk, not the risk, the certainty, okay, of propagating social bias that are in these data that are going to be really troubling. I mean, if we, for example, use this, to determine, we build an AI engine to determine, who is going to be convicted of a felony, okay, in the next 3 years or next 10 years, I can tell you what the answer is without spending 6 months to build the engine. In the United States, that AI engine will determine that the person is a Black male between the ages of 18 and 30. Does anybody really want to live with that answer? Or if we're to use the intersection of AI and HR, let's say in the United States Army, and maybe we want to use it to determine who we're going to assign to what building or who we're going to promote. I mean, there is so much social bias in those data that they're just going to be perpetuated by the AI engine. I can tell you what the answer is from the system. The person you're going to promote, the person you're going to assign, it's going to be white, male, went to West Point. So we need to be, if we look at what's going on in social media today, where these social media giants are using AI in highly deleterious manners to, to manipulate billions of people at a time, 2.2 billion people at the level of the limbic brain. Limbic brain is the portion of the brain that releases dopamine. This is a neurotransmitter that kind of drives the pleasure center of the brain. And we have 2.2 billion people that are addicted to this little device in their hand because they want somebody to like their photo or give a thumbs up to their tweet or whatever it might be. And this is causing, enormous public health issues, particularly amongst young people, where we have self-image issues, loneliness, depression, suicide. We have the weaponization of these systems by bad actors in Europe and in the United States. We've seen it with Brexit. We've seen it in the U.S. elections. We have North Korea, Iran, China, Russia interfering in our elections, and the social media companies are looking the other way. And in Europe and the United States, the social media companies are using their power and using these AI engines to filter the news that we're provided to try to get their agenda across, whether it has to do with the selection of the next president of the United States or whether UK is going to go through with Brexit or not. So these are very troubling issues. And I think that, if government, I think Europe is well ahead of the United States in regulating with GDPR and other initiatives that they've taken that are very positive. And by the way, I'm not a big government guy. I have no use for government. But, this is one of these areas where I believe that if government does not regulate, we will be very sorry. Go read, George Orwell's, 1984 for details, because we're going to have to live there.
Right. I think you make a really compelling case there, Tom, for the importance of regulation. But of course, governments need to be well informed to make the right decisions on that. And that's always a bit of a contentious area. But let me pause there on that topic, because I think we could very happily talk for a lot longer. And I do want to ask you a couple of other questions in the time we have today. When it comes to telecom providers embracing the potential of AI, what do you believe is holding companies like telcos back? And what do they really need to be thinking about? Because you're describing in everything you've shared so far the power of AI, but also the risks of AI. So how do companies, when we think about the telecom industry, roughly 1,000 operators around the world, all trying to figure this out, what's the right pathway for them to navigate this issue? And what do they need to get in place in order to really leverage AI to be successful?
Well, they need visionary leadership, to be able to see the market opportunity that will be there in 5 years, in 10 years, and make sure that their company is positioned to be a leader in this field. Because those CSPs that position themselves as leaders, and primary technology providers that fuel these digital transformation initiatives will be the leading telecommunications companies in this century, hard stop. Okay, as it relates to internally taking advantage of these technologies, there is no large telco in the world that doesn't have, at least 100, kind of build it yourself IT projects going on. And, they never go anywhere. They never work. They always, people are working on building these kind of mass data lakes where we're trying to come up with a unified federated image of all of the data and all of the objects that interact with the telecommunications network. I mean, this is a non-trivial, unsolvable problem, and people need to focus on tractable problems. What's a tractable problem? Predictive maintenance for 5G towers. That's a tractable problem. It can easily solved, could be up in production in 6 months. What's a tractable, solvable AI problem? Customer churn. We can predict customer churn with very, very high levels of precision and high levels of recall using AI. And for any telecommunications provider in the world, it can be live in full production use in 6 months. So my advice is focus on projects where there's measurable economic and social return associated with it. Okay, and don't boil the ocean. Okay, get the project, bring it live. Okay, and become personally familiar with the details. Appoint a chief digital officer who's in charge. Meet with the chief digital officer daily, and mandate and measure that you are achieving the economic returns that you're looking for.
Now, Tom, I think that's sound advice for the executives listening today. If you had to say one advice when it comes to, you mentioned there 100 projects in most telcos around the world, trying to scale and just grapple with, frankly, the amount of data they've got. Is that a sound path to go down, or is it a matter of looking for the right partners to actually help them in that journey? Can telcos really absorb those skills? Yes, they need to be familiar with the technology, but how much of this is about working with the right partners versus trying to build it themselves?
Well, I think the probability of companies successfully building these classes of applications themselves is extremely low. IT organizations are skilled at installing products, okay, and operating products. There's really not a precedent for IT organizations building important new information technologies. As it relates to adopting these technologies and taking advantage of them, there's no question that all of these telco providers in all everybody in every industry will want, you have kind of two choices. You can replace your existing workforce. I think that's the wrong answer. Okay. Or retrain your existing workforce. Right answer. And there's amazing, training resources available, on, Coursera, university programs available online where we can teach our people the skills they need, in data science, data aggregation, cloud computing, virtualization, whatever it might be, so that we have a workforce that is able to take advantage of these technologies and candidly sees how to use them rather than cowers in fear of them.
Well, on that great thought there, Tom, we have to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time today. Tom Siebel, best of luck with C3 AI.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful to have Tom talking to us, Nick. Thank you very much. Jay, there was so much discussed there. I'm not really quite sure where you want to start, whether it's with his views on medicine, on data bias, on regulation. Go on, where do you want to go? Should we go into the future and what he thinks the big topics will be, medicine being one of them?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, Tom's quite a visionary. I think I had the pleasure of meeting him almost 20 years ago. Medicine, a lot of people have actually tried to go into medicine. The biggest hurdles they kind of get to is, of course, data privacy, patient information, how much is actually getting shared across. And when you're looking at medicinal it's not just about aggregating data and identifying common patterns or traits within this data sets. It's identifying the anomalies. So when you're looking at, let's say 10,000, and I always kind of use this as an example, when you're looking at medication or identifying the right sort of prescriptions for, let's say, children, where it says 1 in 10,000 children actually got badly affected by this. But do we really know the makeup of those 10,000 children in terms of their DNA, their where they grew up, or their body's chemistry, the full chemistry, the blood work, what sort of other diseases or illnesses did they have, what's their immune system like? All of this data is missing, or if it's available, it's in multiple different places and it hasn't come together yet.
That was just one of the areas that he said, there was the potential, and you called him a visionary looking ahead. I mean, what would you take away from his wide-ranging views on so many different things? I mean, is it the bias? Is it the regulation? What do you think people should actually sort of hold on to what he told us about?
Well, looking at all the polls, looking at the discussions that are going on in the chat room, I think it's very clear that there is a big lack of understanding in AI, and you've got this aspect within the whole industry, which is the not invented here syndrome. And he stated very clearly, and he's right. You see a lot of this, and but in order to, and when he looked at 5G, which is one of the biggest hot topics right now, and he did say 5G is an enabler. And we've heard 3G is better than 2G and 4G is better than 3G and so forth. And now we're hearing 5G is better than 4G. And when you try to get insights from the industry, from the telcos, it's more like, oh, we're going to be able to come up with faster speeds and we're going to be better priced than our competitors. Well, it's an enabler. In order to really to develop new innovative solutions to this, you've got to really start thinking out of the box. And for this, you need to bring in visionary leadership right from the top. And that's pretty key. And so if you're trying to innovate an entire new sector, you do need to have visionary people coming in.
All right, Jay, for the moment, thank you very much. Remember, you can always go and have another look at any of our content, and it will be available for 7 days after the World Series has ended, so about 2 weeks from now. So don't leave it too late, and make sure that you use the agenda planner as well on the website to make sure that you don't miss anything that you really, really want. And incidentally, while you're on the website, go and have a look at a way to earn yourself or win yourself $250, our event trail throughout the website. Make sure you go and visit 10 different places, maybe 10 different virtual booths, and take part in that. But for the moment, from Jay and from myself, and thank you so much for everyone who's taken part in this one. Thanks very much for watching.